Okay, good. Yeah, so I think that I can do that, and I think that I can
Thank you.
without, I think I can give it back to you without it. You'll have to give it back to me at the end. And then, you know, and then I can turn the recording off, but
Yes, it says it's recording.
okay, good. Yeah, okay.
And we have a couple of more minutes. Do you want to wait until 8:05?
Yeah, why don't we? Because that way, then we'll be good to go. Can y'all see me at all, or is it like absolutely too dark?
Yeah.
Do I need to make it closer? Trying to get light on every.
I can see you well.
Okay, good. I was going to say maybe my hat's not probably helping. It's got a big shadow. I probably should have put the other one on, but I was trying to look kind of like the picture too in the ad we sent out in case we had some other folks jumping on. So
That was a cute ad. I liked it.
that fun. So that's my felt, and I felt, well, it's winter too. I really probably should wear a felt hat instead of my summer. Because the summer one's yellow and it's got holes in it, but it really matches Mary Ellen's shirt, you know, exactly. So I probably should have wore the yellow hat, and I could, you know.
I have a cowboy hat. I've never worn it. Maybe I should go put it on.
You should. So you got great boots. Do they match your boots, or is it?
No, I don't have cowboy boots. Oh yeah, I have those rubber boots. Yeah.
They look like.
They're Western, rubber Western boots.
Oh, okay. So who knew they even had rubber Western boots?
I'll stick my foot up and I'll be right back.
Okay, you're gonna get your hat.
My sons and daughters, they all have cowboy boots, and my sons have little cute cowboy hats because you know my mom, I told you, was a big fan. So that's what they got for Christmas one year, and they so cute in it.
Jeez. Oh, it's that one. It says, hang on. Okay, hello.
And we have just a minute.
Okay. I can't hear you. I just sent a new email. With the book club link, Esther. All right. Bye-bye. I'm sorry about that. I thought it was the pink phone ringing and it was the other phone ringing. Okay. Maybe that's good. Okay. So yeah, so Hester's jumping on, but yeah, we'll give it a couple minutes and then I could say I'll just edit this exciting part. God, it's just reset. Better light there, but maybe that's no light in this house. That's the only bad thing about houses from the 50s. There aren't any lights. Okay, so yeah, Josh, if you want to go ahead, we'll get started.
Yes. So hello, everyone. So I'm here to welcome and introduce Elizabeth Lawless to our group tonight. She is going to be reading from her book and discussing from Western Legends, Yesterday and Today, African Americans, 1798 to 2009. She's the author of 7 books, including one that we looked at earlier in January, your bestseller book. And she's also a publisher and wears many hats, quite literally. And so thank you all. And I'm really excited about this because, you know, I got your book promo and everything earlier in the month in January. And I remember taking a course on Western legends and film in college, but I went to look through my textbook that we have in history, and you know, they completely left out African Americans in that book in terms of their importance to Western
history,
anything in history. So I'm really looking forward to this lecture.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate it so much, Josh. Thank you for the nice introduction. Yeah, it really is true. And the reason I wrote this book, it's called Western Legends, Yesterday and Today, African Americans from 1798 to 2009. And the reason I wrote the book is because some of you know that I work with Cowboys of Color rodeos, and we used to have like kind of a 2-day, like the day before the rodeo, we would invite older or cowboys and pioneer women and folks to come in and talk to the kids, and we'd bring school kids in. And we had 3 people come from South Texas, and they were in their 80s. 70s, 80s, you know. Now one of them was 90, I think. So it was a husband and wife, and then like maybe he was a brother or he had worked with them on the ranch. And so they, you know, they were coming in their 90s and 100s. And then a couple of years later, I guess one of them passed away. And I said, we have got to capture this history before we lose it, you know. So that's why, because I get a lot of people ask me, you know, what's a white girl like you doing working with black cowboys? You know, I mean, I was the minority for the last 30 years that I was at the rodeo, because, you know, with our volunteer teams, you know, we'd have 30 black people and me, and I would be the only white face. And I should have brought my picture to show y'all, but it was really important because the stories got told around the campfire, the kitchen table. And so the local community knew some of these people, but people outside the community never heard of them. And it was a shame because they were a third, you know, the cowboys on the old trails, on the Western trails after the, basically after the Civil War in 66, 65, 66 war. They thought the war would go on for a few months, but it dragged out for years. So in 68, when they actually, the war was over and they wanted men and people, they wanted people to go west. That was the first time that African Americans could actually be in the military and carry a weapon, okay? Because they didn't want them to have weapons before that. But that's why we have Buffalo Soldiers, because most of those men had been fighting, you know, for 4 or 5 years. They wanted to go home. They didn't want to go west to the Western territories. They didn't want to go fight Indians, but it was African American slaves that were freed that were looking for a new life. And so as a Buffalo Soldier, what happened is you got, you had to serve, I think, a minimum of 2 years, or then for 4 years. And then you got 5 acres of land as a part of your commission once you got out, you know. And so that was, you know, that was an incentive for some of those former slaves to join the Buffalo Soldiers. And they knew about horses, and they knew about cattle, and they knew about things. And if they didn't go in the military, they went to work for the cowboys, for the ranches, and for the haciendas, which half of them were owned by Spanish. You know, they were haciendas and they were owned by Spanish, and they mixed with charros. So there were Native Americans, you know, charros, Hispanics, and African Americans in the West. And about a third of those cowboys in the Old West were African American. But in all the movies, you know, the characters that were African American were played by white cowboys. And that's why that's such a shame that we get our facts, our history from movies, which is fiction and not fact. And so we don't know these facts. So that's why we wrote this book. It's a series of like 31 stories, men and women. We only found about 5 or 6 women, and we had a real hard time getting the women's stories. But we do have a few, and I'm going to start with one of those. Just in honor of my 3 folks that I was telling you about earlier, because they made their own soap. They were the first, you know, environmentalists. They were the first medics, you know, they were the first natural healers. They couldn't jump in the car and go to town. Town was 100 miles away, and they had a wagon or a mule or a horse if they were lucky, you know. Otherwise they were walking, or they were catching a ride with somebody else. And so they made, you know, they made their dolls out of corn husk or pieces of wood and old rag clothes, you know, from their old dresses or skirts or something like that. So I'm going to read y'all a short story here about Henrietta, who was called Aunt Ritty. Her name was Henrietta Williams Foster, and she was a cowgirl of the Texas Coastal Bend. She was born around 1822, don't know exactly, but she passed away in 1926. So the Coastal Bend ranchers were peopled by a unique cultural blend of Europeans, Irish, Africans, and Mexicans. One of these pioneers was Henrietta W. Foster, affectionately known as Aunt Ritty. She was born in Mississippi and brought as a slave with her sisters to the Mexico territory. During her early life, she picked cotton, did laundry, served as a midwife, married a man named Williams, and had a daughter. Although sold as a slave to a ranch west of Victoria, she was a rare person in her time, a woman who worked cattle with men. Black women were usually confined to the fields or the homesteads. She worked cattle, side saddle, and bareback on a white horse, and she would go out into the cow camps with the different hands. Gender and race, Indian and African American, made her most uncommon in the pastures of what would become Texas. Aunt Ritty had no education, but she was smart, and she gained skill with herbal remedies as a midwife, and then she taught others, including her daughter. Later in life, she married a Charles Foster and bought a place in Refugio for $25 by paying it out a quarter a week. A person of honor and strength, she was not opposed to challenging anyone either. When she thought a neighbor was trying to steal her land, she got a hammer and knocked a hole in his head. Thinking he was dead, she ran to tell the law that she just killed Brother John Thornton. But when they went to the scene of the crime, they found he wasn't dead, in fact. So she demanded that they put him in jail for trying to steal her land. So anyway, she was small in stature, she was dark in color, but she was known to be stubborn and ready for anything. Aunt Ritty lived into her hundreds, and she's buried in Refugio, Texas. And it was not easy to step out of the restrictions imposed, especially at that time, on women in particular and Black women especially. So, but she did, and she became a legend in the Texas Coastal Bend. So Aunt Ritty, Johanna July, Kathy Williams, Mary Fields, they all come alive at festivals and schools and museums and diversity programs through one of our great storytellers, another great storyteller like Hester Johnson that some of you know, named Lee Reed. Rosalietta Reed is from West Texas, and she plays these West Texas cowgirls so that the history is provided and that it's living history. And we can tell the children of today and the adults that never heard these stories about these Western legends that most of us have never heard about. So that's Aunt Ritty. So I hope y'all enjoyed that story about Aunt Ritty.
I see some of Aunt Ritty in Alicia. She sounds a little sassy. She's short. I'm only 4'10", but she carries a tall stick with her.
There you go. There you go. So you might consider a hammer, Alicia, as an opportunity there. But well, maybe we've got time. So I'll go ahead and read two. I really wanted to read. These are, and basically what we have is 31 stories, and 13 of them are from the 1800s and 12 of them are currently living now. So I'm going to read you one more story from the 1800s. About Henrietta Flipper. He was the second lieutenant, but he was the first African graduate of West Point. And he was born in 1856 and died in 1940. So he actually lived a long time too, but there's some interesting things about him. And then I'm going to flip over and I'm going to tell you about another Black cowboy, a bull rider from Houston, Texas, I think, even though some of y'all might have seen his story. Texas Monthly actually finally did a story. So he finally got some national recognition that he never got when he was rodeoing for, you know, on the circuit because he was Black. But all the other cowboys that you talk to, the bull riders you talk to, if you say, who's the best bull rider ever? They say Murtis Dykeman. And it doesn't matter if they're Black or white or Hispanic or Brazil or Australia or Canada, they all know his name, even though he never was given the championship because he was Black, you know, and they always scored him down because of that. So anyway, but let's talk about Henrietta Flipper first. So let me read y'all a little bit about Henry. Henry Ossian Flipper was born into slavery in 1856 at Thomasville, Georgia. His education began in the wood shop of another slave when he was 8 years old. Flipper attended American Missionary Association schools during his youth and entered Atlanta University when it was established in 1869. Flipper's dream was to become a military officer. In 1873, he wrote to newly elected Georgia Congressman James Freeman asking to be appointed to West Point. Now see, I just lost my light. Sorry about that. Try that again. So he wrote to Georgia Congressman James Freeman asking to be appointed to West Point. If qualified and worthy, Freeman would recommend Flipper. After a series of letters were exchanged, Freeman forwarded Flipper's nomination to the Secretary of War. After passing the required examinations, Flipper achieved a major step in his journey when he officially entered the academy on July 1st, 1873. The young cadet excelled at French, Spanish, law, and engineering. In 1877, he was the first Black to graduate from West Point. The young second lieutenant soon found himself assigned to the 10th Cavalry, Buffalo Soldiers, and stationed on the frontier at Fort Sill in Indian Territory. While at Fort Sill, Flipper, with his engineering skills, was ordered to construct a new drainage system to help eliminate stagnant ponds that were blamed for increasing cases of malaria. His efforts were successful, and the ditch soon bore his name, Flipper's Ditch. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1977. Flipper was transferred to Fort Concho in 1880, where his troops was one of several in the field pursuing the elusive Apache chief Victorio and his small band of warriors who were raiding on both sides of the Rio Grande. He was then ordered to Fort Davis, Texas, where he was assigned the duties of acting assistant quartermaster and acting commissary of sustenance. Things seemed to be going well for the young soldier until a particularly hard commander, Colonel William R. Schaefer, came to the post. Schaefer dismissed him of his duties. Then Flipper discovered funds missing from his trunk. Afraid of the ill-tempered Schaefer, Flipper tried to conceal the loss until the money could be found. Flipper's efforts resulted in his being court-martialed, charged with embezzlement, and conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. His trial was held in the Fort Davis Chapel, and the court found him guilty of misconduct and ordered him dismissed. Flipper's dream of graduating from West Point was achieved, but his life as a soldier was cut short. However, he took his skills and became a respected surveyor. And in 1890, he opened his own engineering and mining office in Arizona. So from the skills that he learned. So, you know, even though he was the quartermaster, someone else probably stole the money, but he was blamed for it. And the reason he was dismissed, obviously, is because he was African-American, because almost all of the commanders of all the Buffalo Soldiers were white. There were not any Black commanders of any of the troops, the 9th and 10th Cavalry or the infantry troops. There were actually 4 infantry troops in the very beginning in 1868 that were established, and then they were combined into 2 infantry troops and 2 cavalry troops. So an infantryman was somebody that marched. A cavalryman was someone that rode on horseback. But even then, they were given the worst. You know, they were given the poorest or unhealthiest animals. They were given, you know, the poorest equipment, the poorest weapons, if they had any at all. You know, they got 1 change of clothes instead of, you know, 2, whatever it was, you know. So even though they were on the plains, even though they were fighting Indians and they were fighting for what was the United States at the time, they still had, you know, hardship, and they still had discrimination, you know, on certain things, but they also served with valor. And there are 2 or 3 other stories of Buffalo Soldiers in the book. There are stories about horse trainers, African-American traders and scouts and people like that, as well as musicians and things. So I would recommend you get a copy and learn more about Corporal Isaiah Mays and Sergeant Benjamin Brown, who both served as Buffalo Soldiers. A lot of people know about Bill Pickett, who was the father of bulldogging, and he was from Taylor, Texas. We hear a lot about Bill, so I didn't want to read about him. We hear a lot about Nat Love. I will read you 1 sentence from Nat Love, which I love, which was, I gloried in the danger, in the wild and free life of the plains, the new country I was continually traversing, and the many new scenes and incidents continually arising in the life of a Rough Rider. So he reminisced. And the reason we know about Nat Love is because he actually is the only one that wrote a book about his life and his times. And so, so that's why we have his name and know a little bit more about him than we do some of the others. But I wanted to, did anybody see the article in Texas Monthly? I guess it was probably last year about Murtis Dightman. He's actually from Houston, Texas, from Crockett, which is outside of Houston, Texas. But I'm going to read you a little bit about Murtis, and then I should have showed you your picture. So I guess I can, maybe you can see. So that's Aunt Ritty. Can you get her up there with her horse? And like I say, she rode side saddle out and did and rounded up cattle with the men, which was very unusual at the time. There's Mr. Flipper in his uniform and his thing, and then here's Mr. Dightman, Murtis Dightman. So Murtis Dightman, outstanding bull rider. He was born in 1935. He's still living today. He lives down in Crockett, Texas. He's retired, has a farm down there, a cattle ranch, and they used to have a rodeo down there every year in his honor and raise money for the community. But Murtis Dightman was born in Crockett, Texas in 1935 to Ada Lee and O.D. Dightman. Raised on a ranch, he went to school in Crockett and learned ranching from his father. In the late 1950s, he moved to Houston and found a job as a truck driver. Each year, he noticed rodeos came to town, but there were never any black cowboys. When he questioned the organizer, he was told he would be better off to start his own rodeo because the white cowboys wouldn't want blacks to compete with them. The lack of black contestants continued to bother Dightman. So against advice of friends, he set his heart on competition that would get him to the big rodeos. Although he continued to drive a truck, he also started fighting bulls as a rodeo clown. So a lot of guys started that way. A lot of guys started as clowns and bullfighters, and then they went on to either do calf roping or bull riding or something like that once they kind of became known around. Because really cowboys don't care what you look like, and horses and cows for sure don't care what you look like. They just want to get you off their back or get away from you. And so they really did out on the trails. They just wanted to know that you could do your job and do it well, and so that was kind of the criteria out on the roads. They did have segregation in the towns. There were a lot of times when the cowboys couldn't go to town. Or they'd have to go to the back of restaurants. They couldn't go in the front doors of restaurants, things like that. One of the stories, and maybe somebody y'all are familiar with just because of the movies and stuff, was Bose Eichard, who basically was with the Goodnight Loving trail guys, so the guys that built the trail and ran the cattle up there. And basically, they let him carry the money because he was a black guy, because they knew nobody would think the black guy had any money. So he actually was their banker and their detective. And, and he could go places and stand around and hear conversation and nobody thought anything of it because he was an old black guy. And, and then he would go back and tell them, if somebody was planning something, or they were trying to raid cattle, or they were trying to, thinking about jumping them or whatever, not realizing that he was the one that had the money at the whole time, But anyway, let's finish up with Murtis. So the lack of those black contestants bothered him a little bit, but he started as a rodeo clown, and in 1961, he began riding bulls. And although it was difficult to get the scores to place, he earned the respect of the cowboys of all races. Dightman wasn't the first black cowboy to compete in professional rodeos, but he was the first serious contender for the world title. In 1964, he placed in the top 20 and became the first black cowboy to qualify for the National Finals Rodeo, which is the big granddaddy rodeo called the NFR. Today, it's held in Las Vegas. It started out in Oklahoma City, and actually it started here at the State Fair. They had it here in Dallas first, and then it moved to Oklahoma City. And then Las Vegas got in on the act and moved it out there. And in the first 10 days of December, which were the slowest days of the year in Las Vegas, they brought the rodeo in. And in that 13 days, now they make millions. They make more money in that 13 days than they do half the year, the rest of the time of years. So obviously you understand COVID-19 not only put us in the rodeo bank that erupted our Cowboys of Color rodeo, but it really has put a hardship on these other rodeos too. Because at 25%, you know, like you say, that's basically bankruptcy. You know, we need 50, 60, 70% to make it because of the expenses, you know, because you've got horses, you got cattle, you got contestants, you got prize money, you got, you know, ambulance, you got insurance, you got the building, you got all of those ticket holders, you got people that work in all the box offices and stuff. You got to pay all those people. So it's not an inexpensive sport, and rodeo is not an inexpensive sport. And that's why there weren't a lot of black cowboys in it. And the reason Nerdist was a bull rider instead, because you had to have a horse if you roped calves. If you roped steers or took down steers, you had to have a horse. And so a lot of times what they would do is share a horse, like my friend, Mr. Hearn, who was also in the book, and you should read about that. You know, he had to borrow somebody else's horse, and after time, somebody else would put up the prize money, and then he'd split the prize money with them. And that's actually what happened when he won the championship in 1970. He was one of the other black cowboys with Murtis Diamond. So anyway, Murtis did make the finals. He had achieved what nobody else had achieved, and he had achieved his goal too. He went to the NFR 7 times and finished third in 1967, as close as he ever came to a world title. But everybody said he should have won. Okay, everybody thought he was the best, and if you talk to cowboys today, they still tell you the same. From 1966 to 1972, Dykeman missed qualifying for the NFR only once. Amazingly, Dykeman didn't even pick up a bull rope until the age of 25, and he was still getting on bulls more than 2 decades later. He never won the world championship because of the social circumstances of the time, but bull riders will tell you that he was one of the best athletes to ever sit a bull. His confidence and courage was legendary. Dykeman never had trouble with nerves before a ride. He only planned to ride until he was 40, but continued flying or driving to rodeos throughout the country for another 10 years, entering as often as he could. Dykeman proved he is capable of riding the impossible ones as well as anyone else. His career helped pave the way for other energetic black bull riders like Charles Sampson, who actually did win the championship in 1984, and Abe Morris, who came along after that. And Abe didn't win the championship, but he was one of the first African-American professional rodeo announcers, and he announces rodeos today. And he has a book called My Cowboy Hat Still Fits. He's out of Colorado. He's in Denver, younger. And Charles Sampson actually grew up in California and watched California in the projects. But he would go, he could walk down to where there were some rodeo, there were some horses, and Murtis Dykeman used to be there at that ranch, or this little ranch, practicing, and they would go to that little ranch and practice because they'd let them come out there. And that's where Charlie Sampson, as a kid, met Murtis Dykeman and decided he wanted to be the first black bull riding championship in honor of Murtis, his hero. And so Charlie actually won, and he beat Donnie Gay, who maybe some of y'all know in Dallas. So in Dallas, the Gay family is the rodeo legacy. They had the rodeo here for 50 years in this community in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They provide all the stock for the Fort Worth Stock Show and rodeos and other rodeos across the country. And Donnie was the 8-time world bull riding champion, and he only lost one time, and it was to Charlie Sampson, called Pee Wee, who was 4 foot tall, and Charlie won the 1 year. And it was so funny. I was at the rodeo one day, and Donnie was being interviewed by a guy from one of the newspaper television stations or something. And so the interviewer asked him, he said, well, who's the best bull rider in the world? And Donnie said, well, that would be me. And the guy was kind of taken aback, you know, he kind of went, what? And he said, well, that would be me, because until somebody wins 9 times, you know, I would be the best, greatest bull rider in the world because I won 8 championships. But the thing about Donnie was he was flying to rodeos. Okay. He wasn't driving 12 hours in a truck with 3 other guys and getting to the rodeo and then having to get on a bull, a 10-ton bull that wanted to kill you, that wanted to step all over you. So he had a little bit of an advantage over some of these other guys because his dad was in the rodeo business and they had done well. And his brothers were in the rodeo business. And so that's kind of the difference between bull riders and everything else. But so Dykeman still runs the family restaurant ranch in Crockett, Texas. He also started a parade and a rodeo in his hometown in 1988 that continues today. In 1997, Dykeman became the first living and the third African-American cowboy to be inducted into the National Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. He also was inducted into the Texas Rodeo Cowboy Hall of Fame in 2001, the first class of the National Cowboys of Color Museum Hall of Fame in Fort Worth, and the Ring of Honor at the 2003 PBR Ford Built Tough World Finals in Las Vegas. So he finally got his recognition. And then last year, Texas Monthly did a story and he was on the front cover of Texas Monthly as, you know, the great bull rider. So anyway, so those are just a few of the stories. They're little short stories. They're stories you can pick up and read in a few seconds and put down. And like I say, we've got rodeo judges, we've got Buffalo Soldiers, we've got, this is Rosalietta Reed, who actually plays, she's a cowgirl from West Texas, but she's the one that plays some of the other women of the West from the 1800s. She does things like Tea on the Prairie with kids and after school programs and things like that. And she has all the dresses and the fans, the long dresses and the fancy hats and how they all dressed up and things like that. And so I would encourage you to check out not only this book and other books related. You're probably going to be seeing some things because it's Black History Month and March is Women's History Month. So maybe you'll be seeing a few more things related to people. And that's why we wrote the book, because I wanted these stories to be told. I wanted them to be captured for the future, because I think if kids see somebody that looks like them, then they think I can do it too. You know, if he can do it, I can do it. So these are great role models. These were ordinary people who lived extraordinary lives because of the choices that they made, and sometimes in very difficult circumstances. So I appreciate you so much for coming, for letting me tell you some of my stories about some of these great legends. I hope that you'll look up some others, and you can probably Google and get some other stuff too. Mary Fields, a lot of people know about her. She was one of the other cowgirls in the book. Not too many people know about Johanna July. She was a horse trainer and she trained horses for the military, which her dad actually did at first, and then he passed away and she took over and continued to train horses. And she had a unique way of doing that, which I'm not going to tell you because it's a secret. So you have to go buy the book so you can read the story. But thank you very much. I know I went over a little bit, but I appreciate y'all being here. Does anybody have any questions about anybody that we read about or anybody else you might have heard about or wanted to know about over the years?
And if you do have a question, you're on mute, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Nobody has a question.
I do not have a question, but I just want you to know again that my mom loves, loves, loves the book.
Okay,
And
great.
it has, I mean, her eyes was already open, of course, because this is just the stories that she likes and
Right.
she likes to read about and learn about, but it just opened her eyes that much more. And she's like, I gotta go visit some of these people now, how true that can be.
That's right. That's right.
Is up to her.
Tell her to
But
come
it
on
just
down.
opened her eyes a little bit more.
Because 4 or 5 of them live here in Dallas and Texas for sure. So we
Yes,
can make that happen for her. We can introduce her to some of these people.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
We have, we have Doug Smiley, who was probably the youngest member in the book here, and he trained Tennessee walking horses. And he decided, he didn't want to drive a Ford. He wanted to drive a Cadillac. He didn't want to get on a quarter horse, which is kind of like the quarter horses are kind of the working horse. They're the ranch horses. They're the horses, even though they race, they're really known more for, for cutting horses, for cutting cattle out. You might have heard of cutting horses and things like that, events. But, thoroughbreds, obviously bred for racing. They like to run. They're better at running and stuff. But these Tennessee walking horses were crossbred, and they were crossbred during the Civil War because they needed to be able to ride long day, like all long days. And so they did a crossbreed between the Tennessee, it's a cross between the Tennessee walking horse and something else. Hold on. Not Palominos, but let me see if I can see it. If we have it here, I don't know if we actually have it. We should have it, but I don't see it. It talks more about him than it does about the walking horses. But anyway, but that's why they were bred together, because the seat, they were much easier to ride. They had a more broader back. A Tennessee walking horse is a broader horse, so it had broader hindquarters, and it also could travel over rocks and trees and woods and through other things. And they did that. They were kind of those high stepping horses that you might see sometime on some of the shows and things. So lots of interesting stories. There was an earlier black trainer that, like you say, that didn't get a lot of recognition in his early days. That was a hero for Doug, and that's why Doug became a horse trainer. In addition to being a social worker, Alicia, he worked with the Boys and Girls Clubs in his real job and his day job, and then he trained horses on the side. So lots of interesting stories. There's lots of history, and I think it's a collective heritage that we have, especially for those of us that live in Texas and the West or the Southwest. We can feel that connection, and when we tell kids about these heroes, then they can make the connection too. They can go, oh wow, you mean there's somebody that looked like me that actually did something in the Old West? Because none of this history is in the textbooks. Not only was it not in your textbook, Josh, at the college level, it's not in any of the textbooks at the elementary or the middle school or the high school level either. So anyway, so we're happy to tell these stories, these Western legend stories, because it's the stories of heroes. And I thank you very much for listening and being here. Sorry, my lighting is a little bit shadowy. Take my hat off a little bit so you can see our face. But thank y'all for coming. Next week, we'll have Joshua Maines will be here, and he'll be reading from a wonderful book of poems and poetry that he has called Naming the Lepers. And it's a very sad but profound story. So I'd invite all of you to come back next week and to bring a friend, invite a friend to come. You can always find the listing at our Facebook page for Dynamic Authors Group. So if you just type in Dynamic Authors Group and Facebook, it would come up. The links will be there. And then we'll try to add them too in our newsletters and things that we send out. So sign up for our newsletter, and then we'll be in touch.
And Beth, keep rocking that hat.
Yes, that's
Yes.
very cool. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
All right, look at that feather. Yeah, that's great.
It's all feathers up there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it looks nice.
Thanks.
All right.
Well, Liz, you did a great job. It was very interesting.
Very interesting.
You're great
Yes.
on video. You tell a great story.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I need a little encouragement. I don't know why it bothers me so much, but.
Oh, you did a great job.
You did a great job. Maybe it's the low light gave you confidence.
That's right. That's right. I better not get a bigger light. Well, thank y'all so much for being here. And then we'll come back and hear Josh next week. We'll invite some other people. We'll send out the list. If you get if you're on social media and you get the post, please share it on your your pages, and encourage other people to come. And we'll just keep doing every week. And I think eventually we'll build a different audience. We'll expose ourselves to some more people. I probably shouldn't say that out loud about what I said, but we'll expose our books reading and our stories to other people. So,
Yes.
So that's great. So y'all have a great week, and I'll be in touch probably individually with some of you as we go along.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Nice.
Bye.
Thank you. Sorry.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. I tip my hat to you.
Okay.
And
All right.
I've made you the host so that you can stop the recording and everything.
Yeah, and I think actually when you just quit, it actually goes off too. So anyway, well, Beth, good luck.
Thank you.
Jim, we're praying for Jim. We're checking on him and stuff too. And the church has been calling, and they do have a printed newsletter that's still going out. So if you know of anybody, you know, if you talk to anybody that says they're not getting any communication,
Okay.
and
Right.
then I guess that's all I know tonight.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Good night.
Night. I can end that, and then maybe we'll go on. Oh, golly. Still too dark. I got too much dark hair.